So we now move to questions. As I said, we have had a lot of questions in advance. We've got 36 questions submitted in advance. This is submitted by Alistair Holmes, who's age 15. He's a student at Ramwood Park School. And his question is, in the light of recent events regarding the main political party's use of fake news, is fake news a legitimate campaign tool? A question almost exactly the same from Kate Netherton.
We need to find ways to fight this scourge, and I urge every single person here, think about the words you're reading in leaflets and in the newspaper, and is it true? You have to check all of your information properly. And sadly, that has become, it's a bit of a problem, and there's misinformation going in all directions at the moment.
Thank you very much. Sid.
Yeah, obviously fake news is never acceptable. I mean, what we stand for is the truth, and what we need is the truth. But there is incredible bias throughout the media. And I've frequently accused the BBC of being fake news because of the number of things that they've said. I mean, just to give one example, how often do we talk about the fact that during the referendum campaign, George Osborne, who was then Chancellor, said, if you vote to leave the EU, then income tax will go up by 2%, by 2 pence in the pound. There will be 15 billion cut from public services. There will be 870,000 jobs lost. This is what will happen if you vote to leave the EU. I mean, how often has that been mentioned? How often has it been mentioned that on the side of a bus, the Leave campaign put, we'll give 350 million per week to the NHS? Now, that was a gross figure and was a misleading figure, and that should never have been put on the bus. But the misleading figures weren't just coming from one side. And if we're going to have balance, we've got to have the truth coming from all sides, and we've got to delve down and see what is fact and what is true. And that is one of my jobs all the time, because for us, truth is just so important.
In politics, we have an epidemic of people who are disengaged and disenfranchised because they cannot trust the politicians in Westminster. And if we want to rebuild that trust, then we have to make sure that there is no place for fake news or misrepresentation of information, such as some of the fairly scandalous bar charts that the Liberal Democrats have sent around the constituency in the past few weeks. There is plenty of opportunity for open and honest debate, which is why things like this Hustings are so great, because we actually get the opportunity to talk to residents who we are we're looking for their votes. And it's really important that people have trust in their politicians, because how else can we solve some of the problems that we are now facing? It's absolutely imperative that we rebuild that trust, and that means we cannot have fake news. And the Conservative Party are already selling off the NHS.
Let me explain my understanding of the point.
Thank you very much. Question from floor. The gentleman here was up. His hand was up like lightning. So, would you like to ask your question?
Are you going to be employing 50,000 more nurses? You said honesty.
Thank you for that. I spoke to the Health Secretary about this very thing. So let me explain my understanding of the point. It is that 50,000 more than there are today will be. The aim is that they will be provided and trained and developed by the end of the Parliament. That is the position. The question about whether it's 50,000, whether some of those nurses are still in training, or whether some of these nurses have already been announced, is actually not the point. The question is, from today, at the end of the Parliament, will we have, the aim is, are we going to have 50,000 more nurses than we have today? The answer to that is yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Can respond to this, and Sam was desperate, and then Sid, and then Kay.
Do you remember at the beginning I said that you'd hear claims made by parties that they couldn't deliver if Brexit happens? Well, right now there's 40,000 vacancies for nurses in the UK. Now, it takes a while for them to train. Now, if Brexit happens and we lose even more EU citizen nurses out of the UK, where are we going to find these nurses to fill those 40,000 vacancies that we already need? Well, the biggest source for them is the European Union. So if Brexit happens, we quite simply can't deliver those 40,000 nurses we need, let alone the 50,000 that Ben may be promising or not. I didn't quite follow his answer there, but yeah, but it's absolutely impossible to do what the Conservative Party are claiming that they're going to do if Brexit happens. So please bear that in mind.
Okay. Does Sid want to respond, and then Kay?
I see nothing wrong in the Conservative Party having an aim of getting 50,000 more nurses. If they achieve it, well, it'll be a tremendous achievement. I must admit, I have my misgivings as to whether they will be able to. The idea that somehow Brexit is going to be a problem is... the actual figures are that the Liberal Democrats are saying they're going to have £50 billion more if we remain in the EU, but that's over 5 years, so that's an average of £10 billion a year. We are currently giving £10 billion a year net to the EU, so if we leave the EU, we will gain at £10 billion a year. So that basically means that your £50 billion that you will gain by presumed higher growth rate will be exactly the same, just to replace what we actually give to the EU. So it'll actually be no increase whatsoever. So the idea that somehow, if we leave the EU, we can't have nurses is utter rubbish. Rubbish.
Okay.
Thank you. I think it's all well and good to promise tens of thousands of more nurses, but unless you have a plan to actually make that happen, then it's just empty promises, isn't it? What we're planning to do is to reinstate the nursing bursary, which will make a massive difference, and then to extend that to midwives and allied health workers like physiotherapists and pharmacists and I can't even say it, orthoptists, my favourite word, because we need to actually make working in the NHS an attractive thing to do for people to want to come and do it, which is why we're also offering a 5% pay rise for NHS workers, because we need to make sure that they're valued and that they want to come and work here, and to keep them in their jobs, because at the moment there's not just a recruitment crisis, there's a retention crisis. So you can promise as many as you want, but if you don't have a plan, it's not going to happen.
A pre-submitted question from John Davis, and he's asking about how do we actually go about conducting the training of doctors and nurses. Will we be heavily reliant on expensively trained talent from poorer countries who can ill afford to lose them? How will we commit to providing new medical schools to provide the staff that are required? And then he makes the comment, since it's retirees who fly a lot and increasingly need the NHS, he'd increase air passenger duty to pay for it all. But that's his personal view. But how do the candidates respond to the need, how we actually train the additional people? Could I start with Kay and then Bim next?
Thank you. I think I've pretty much answered that question in the last response. But it takes a long time to train doctors and nurses. It's not something overnight. And we are reliant on our foreign nationals to bolster up our health service. But we have to invest in training in this country, and that, as I said before, means making an attractive and sustainable thing for people to do. If you're a nurse and you can't afford to do rent and you're relying on a food bank, that's not something that's sustainable. We can't have that in our country, and to make sure that we can train the people that we need to rebuild our NHS from the pit that it has fallen into, we need to invest in that training and make those training places available. And that really is effectively the way in which we need to do it.
Yeah. Ben?
Well, there are really two parts to this. On the foreign doctors thing, as somebody whose father was a doctor from Nigeria, I spoke to John about it earlier, and that's not taken in any way in the wrong way. I think that we welcome skilled people from all over the world who come to work in this country in the NHS or indeed in any other part of our country. However, there is a balance. We need to have as many locally trained British people who train in our medical professions, not just doctors, but nurses and and radiographers and all the rest of it. There are two things in particular that we're doing that we need to continue to do and improve on. The first is open more medical schools. We've done that and we'll continue to do that. And I think the nearest one to here is probably Chelmsford, but I may be wrong, the nearest new one. The second is we are restoring the nurses' bursary. Yes, it was taken away under the coalition government, but I believe that it was right to bring it back. So that's the second thing we're doing for nurses. But the last thing is this. Education and STEM subjects in particular need to make sure that they are and they continue to grow in the take-up of our young people, especially women whose take-up, young women's take-up of STEM subjects has historically been lower than that of men. We need to increase that take-up so that more of our young people see medicine as an attractive career.
Thank you very much, Bim. Sam?
Some of what Bim just said was actually quite good. The investment in STEM subjects is absolutely fantastic, and it's great to hear you saying that, Bim. It's unfortunate that your party has decided to cut the schools to the bone so they can't afford to teach the STEM subjects. Apologies, STEM is a real passion of mine because I come from an engineering background. Now, one of the things for the NHS, we need to listen to what the doctors and the healthcare professionals want to do. Now, the Lib Dems have got a plan to fund this. It's fully costed like everything in our manifesto. We're going to put a penny in the pound on income tax. So we're going to charge you a bit more tax for the NHS. And that's really just to raise 6 or 7 billion. It's a bit of a sticking plaster to get us through the current immediate problems the health service faces, mental health and social care included. But we are going to introduce a new tax that's ring-fenced purely for the NHS. But before we do that, we want to run a full consultation with the whole healthcare profession to work out exactly how much money we need to raise. It's no good banding around a whole bunch of numbers and figures. They're meaningless. We need to know exactly what needs to be done, and that has to be evidence-based, and it has to come from the doctors and nurses, the whole pharmaceutical and pharmacological, and there's a word that you struggle with as well,
you get extra time for that.
And we have to get that expertise, feed in and find out what we need to do. And that is what the Liberal Democrats will do. The air passenger duty point, I'll just address that quickly. That is actually a Lib Dem policy that we will, for frequent flyers, will charge them a bit more. But we weren't actually ring-fencing that for the NHS. That was going to pay for something else.
OK, that's Sid.
This is one aspect to this question which I'd like to comment on. And that is the extent to which we're attracting health professionals from all over the world to come and work in the UK. I mean, can I say that I think the NHS is a fantastic thing and a fantastic institution, and it's really borne out by the fact that what we actually pay per head to the NHS is around £2,500 per person. And in America, they pay about $3,500 per person to their health system, which is absolute rubbish. And there's lots of people left without any proper health cover. So, you know, the NHS is the envy of the world. But I also honour the trained doctors and nurses that are trained in this country that will go and work in Africa and will go and work in other third world countries. Because the actual medicine which they do there is actually far more than the medicine that they're able to do in the UK for the equivalent amount of training. And it is wrong if the UK is a very attractive place for people to live from all over the world. It's an attractive place for people to come to. But it is wrong for us to be sucking into this country the best health people from all over the world. They are needed in